The rain had been falling for 3 days without pause, and Maren Ashcombe knew the sound of it now the way a mother knows the breathing of her child. She lay on the thin straw mattress in the loft above her father's small cottage, listening to the water hammer against the thatch. It was not a soft rain. It was the kind of rain that carried weight in it, that dropped in fat cold beads and did not care what it hit. She could smell the wet wool of her cloak, drying near the small fire below, and the sharp smell of the peat her father burned when there was no proper wood, and under that the deep green smell of the river that ran along the low edge of the village. That river was the reason she could not sleep. She had lived near it all her 21 years, and she knew its moods the way some girls knew the moods of their suitors. Tonight it was angry. Tonight it was pushing at the banks the way a horse pushes at a gate it means to break. She turned on the mattress and the straw rustled beneath her. Her breath came out in small pale clouds, even inside the cottage. For the wind was slipping through the cracks between the timbers, and the shutter above her head rattled every few moments like a loose tooth. She pulled the coarse blanket up to her chin. The wool scratched her skin. She was used to that too. She had been sleeping under this same blanket since she was 10, since her mother had died of the fever that took half the village that winter, since her father had gone quiet and small and thin like a candle burning down. Below her, in the single room that made up the rest of the cottage, her father coughed. It was a wet, tired cough, the kind that made her chest hurt to hear. She waited until it stopped. She waited until his breathing settled again. Then she closed her eyes and tried to sleep. She could not. The river would not let her. She sat up. The floor of the loft was cold under her bare feet, and the boards groaned when she stood. She moved carefully. She did not want to wake him. She crept down the narrow ladder that led into the main room, and she pulled her cloak from where it hung near the dying fire, and she wrapped it around her shoulders. The wool was still damp. She did not care. She lifted the small iron latch on the door and stepped outside. The night hit her like a hand. The wind came down off the hills in long cold sheets, and the rain drove into her face, and she pulled the hood of her cloak up over her hair. The village of Little Marden was a scatter of low cottages along a curved lane, with the church at one end and the miller's house at the other, and the river running behind them all like a black ribbon. She could not see the river from where she stood. She could only hear it. And the sound of it was wrong. It was not the steady hush of moving water. It was a heavy, sucking roar, the sound of something dragging things under. She walked toward it. Her boots sank into the mud with every step. The lane was already a shallow stream. Water ran past her ankles, cold as iron, carrying small twigs and one dead leaf and a piece of straw that had blown from someone's roof. She lifted her skirts with one hand and kept walking. The smell of the river grew stronger the closer she came. It smelled of turned earth and old wood, and something faintly sour, the way rivers smell when they have swallowed things that should not be in them. She reached the low stone wall that ran between the last cottage and the water. She put her hand on it. The stone was rough and freezing under her palm. She looked over. She could not see the banks. There were no banks. The river had climbed halfway up the field, and where the willow trees had stood in a neat row along the water, only their upper branches were visible now, waving in the black flood like the arms of drowning men. She could see the water moving. She could see it pulling at the base of the stone wall she was leaning on. She could see, further out, the pale shape of a wooden fence that had come loose from someone's field and was being carried along like a toy. Her stomach dropped. She had seen the river high before. She had seen it flood the lower pasture, and she had seen it lick at the doorstep of old Farley's cottage 2 years ago. But she had never seen it like this. This was not a flood coming. This was a flood arriving. The stones of the wall she stood on were the last thing between the river and the village, and the water was already curling over the top of them in small, insistent tongues. She turned and ran. The mud grabbed at her boots. The rain drove into her eyes. She ran up the lane past the low cottages where every window was dark, and she thought of the people inside them. Mrs. Grail with her 3 children, the old cobbler who could barely walk, the blacksmith and his wife who had just brought a new baby home last week. She thought of her own father, coughing in his bed. She thought of the way the water was moving. She began to shout, "Flood! Flood! Wake up! The river is coming! Her voice was thin against the wind. She shouted again, louder, and her throat scraped with the cold. She banged on the first door she came to with the flat of her hand. "Wake up, it is the river. Wake up." She did not wait for an answer. She ran to the next. She banged on that one too. "Wake up, get to high ground. The flood is here." Windows began to open. Voices called down to her, confused, sleep thick. She did not stop to explain. She kept moving, kept shouting, kept pounding on doors. Her palm was raw. Her chest was burning. The rain slapped her face and stung her eyes, and she blinked it away and kept going. Flood. Flood at the river wall. Wake the children. Wake them all. She had never in her life raised her voice like this. In the village she was known as the quiet one, the one who kept her head down, the one who spoke softly when she spoke at all. But there was no room now for quiet. She threw her whole small body into the shouting. She made her voice as big as she could make it. She made it carry. She did not know that anyone was listening beyond the village. She did not know that on the low rise above the lane, where the road curved up toward the old hunting lodge that had stood empty for years, a horse had stopped in the middle of the road with its rider still in the saddle. She did not know that the rider had reined the horse in at the sound of her first shout, and that he had sat very still while the wind whipped his cloak around him, and that he had listened. She did not know that the rider was the Duke of Ravenhurst, whose lands began at the far edge of Little Marden and stretched all the way to the coast, and who had never once in his life ridden through this village. She did not know that he had left his own great house at dusk that night, on a matter of business he had told no one about, and that he was travelling in a plain black cloak on a plain brown horse, without so much as a servant to accompany him, and that he had chosen this road only because the main road had washed out further east. She did not know that he had heard her voice through the rain the way a man hears a bell struck through fog, and that something in the sound of it had gone into him and taken hold. She only knew that she had to keep shouting. She reached the middle of the lane. Doors were opening now. Men were coming out with lanterns, blinking, half-dressed, their wives behind them wrapped in shawls with children clutching at their skirts. "It is Maron Ashcombe," someone said. "What is she about?" And Maron pointed back toward the river with a hand that shook from the cold, and she said, "Look. Look at it. Look at what it is doing." They looked. She saw the moment the understanding hit them. She saw the colour leave the face of the blacksmith, and she saw Mrs. Grail turn back into her house at a dead run to gather her children, and she saw old Mr. Hurley cross himself and grab the miller's arm. And then, everyone was moving. Lanterns swung. Voices rose. Someone was shouting for the boys to run to the church bell and start ringing it. Someone else was carrying a screaming infant. A dog was barking somewhere. Maron kept running. She had not yet reached her own cottage. Her father was still asleep, or trying to be, and he would not have heard the shouting because his hearing had gone bad these last years, and his cough would have covered it. She ran the last stretch of lane with her heart hammering against her ribs, and her cloak flapping heavy and wet behind her. She burst through the door. "Father! Father! Get up! Get up now!" He was already sitting up on the low bed near the wall, blinking at her, his grey hair sticking up from his head at all angles. "Maron? What are you, the river? The river is coming over. We have to get to the church. We have to go now." He did not argue. He had not argued with her about anything in years. He swung his thin legs off the bed and reached for his boots, and she was already gathering his coat and his stick, and the small tin box that held the only money they had. She helped him stand. He was so light. She had not held him up like this before, and she was startled at how little there was of him. He leaned on her, and he coughed, and he said, "I heard you shouting. From outside. I thought I dreamed it." "You did not dream it. Come on." They went out into the rain together. The lane was full of people now, all moving in the same direction. All headed up the slope toward the church which sat on the highest ground in the village. The church bell had begun to ring, a hard, uneven clang that meant emergency. Children were crying. A man was carrying a goat under one arm. The rain was heavier now, or seemed to be. Maron guided her father through the crowd. She held tight to his arm. She could hear his breath rattling in his chest with every step, and she could feel the tremor in him that was half cold and half something else. They passed the smithy. They passed the cobbler's shop. They were nearly to the low bridge that crossed the shallow stream that ran through the middle of the village, the little stream that fed into the river, when she looked back over her shoulder. She wished she had not. The dark shape of the river had swallowed the stone wall. She could see it in the moonlight that broke for a moment through the clouds, a wide pale sheet of moving water where the field had been, coming toward the lower cottages in a slow, hungry advance. The willow trees were entirely gone under. The wall was gone. And the first of the cottages, the small one that had belonged to the old widow Halsey, was already up to its window sills in flood. "God help us," her father whispered. "Keep walking," Maren said. They kept walking. The bridge over the little stream shook slightly as they crossed it, for the little stream had also risen and was pushing at its banks. On the far side, the lane climbed. Maren felt her calves burn as they went up. Her father was gasping now. She wrapped her arm around his waist and pulled him along. Behind them, the shouting was constant. Ahead of them, the church loomed dark against the dark sky, its windows already flickering with light as someone had thought to open the door and light the lamps inside. People were streaming into it. Old and young, men and women, all of them wet, all of them shaken, all of them alive because Maren Ashcombe had not been able to sleep. She did not know this. She was not thinking about it. She was thinking only about her father's breathing, and the next step, and the next. At the top of the rise, just before the church path, she looked up and saw a horseman standing at the crossroads. He was still. His horse was still. He was watching the village from the height of the little slope. The rain ran off his hooded cloak in silver ropes. She could not see his face. She could see only that he sat the horse the way a man sits who has been born to sit horses, and that his cloak was better than any cloak in the village, and that he was alone. Their eyes did not meet. He was looking past her, down at the lane and the water and the moving people. But something about the shape of him caught her, even in the middle of everything. Something about the stillness. She looked away and pulled her father onward, and they crossed the churchyard and went in through the doors, and the doors closed behind them, and she thought no more about the horseman for a long time. Inside the church it was warm, or it was less cold, which in that moment felt like the same thing. Someone had lit every lamp and every candle they could find, and the yellow light bounced off the plain white walls, and the smell of wet wool and wet hair and wet leather filled the whole space along with the low, steady murmur of frightened voices. Mothers held their children. Old men sat on the pews with their heads in their hands. The vicar, a small round man named Mr. Fenwick, was moving from group to group, patting shoulders, speaking in the calm, low voice of a man who was more frightened than any of them, but had decided not to show it. Maren got her father to a pew. She sat him down. She unbuttoned his wet coat and rubbed his cold hands between hers. His fingers were blue at the tips. She pulled her own cloak off and wrapped it around his shoulders. He tried to protest. She ignored him. "Stay here," she said. "Do not move. I will come back." "Where are you going, girl?" "To help." She went. She moved through the crowded church counting heads without meaning to. She saw Mrs. Grail with all three of her children, wet but alive. She saw the blacksmith and his wife with the new baby wrapped in a shawl. She saw the cobbler on a pew with his stick across his knees. She kept counting. She counted every face she knew, and she came up short by 2. She found the vicar, Mr. Fenwick, old Farley and his wife. "I do not see them." The vicar's face went still. "Are you certain?" "I am certain. Their cottage sits lowest of any. Right by the wall." He closed his eyes for a moment. Then he opened them. "I will go." "You will not," Maren said. "You are needed here." "I will go. Maren, I know the path." She did not wait for him to argue. She turned and pushed her way back through the crowd toward the door, and she was almost at it when a hand closed around her elbow. It was a stranger's hand, gloved, firm, without being cruel. She turned sharply. The horseman from the crossroads was standing beside her. His hood was back now. His hair was dark and wet and pushed back from his forehead. His face was long and hard, and the kind of face that did not smile often. His eyes were grey, not a soft grey, the grey of slate, of a cold sea, of a stone floor in winter. He looked down at her. He was very tall, and he said, in a voice pitched low so that only she could hear it, "You are going back out there." It was not a question. "2 people are missing," she said. "The lowest cottage. I know the way." "Alone?" "Yes, no," he said. She stared at him. She did not know him. She had never seen him before in her life. He was clearly a gentleman, though his clothes were plain, and he had no business giving her orders. But there was something in his face that stopped the sharp words she had ready. He was not looking at her the way men usually looked at her. He was looking at her as if she were a piece of information he was trying to understand. "I do not know you, sir," she said. "You do not need to. I have 2 good hands and a horse. You have neither. If you are going, I am going with you. The horse cannot go through the flood. Then I will leave it. Come, show me the way." She hesitated. She was not in the habit of accepting help from strangers. She was not in the habit of accepting help at all. But 2 old people were in a cottage that was probably already under water. And the vicar could not go, and she could not carry old Farley alone if he was hurt, and this man had 2 good hands, and was standing there waiting for her answer, with rain still running down his jaw. "Come," she said. They went out together. The bell was still ringing above them, and the sound of it followed them down the lane. The stranger did not speak. He walked beside her with long, steady strides, and when she stumbled once in the mud, he caught her elbow again without a word, and set her upright and let go. His hand was strong. She noticed it, and then she did not think about it. They passed the little bridge again. The water in the small stream had risen higher. It was running fast and dirty, and the boards of the bridge were slick. And Merrin almost lost her footing. The stranger crossed just behind her. He did not touch her again, but she could feel that he was close. At the lower end of the lane the water met them. It was ankle-deep in the middle of the road. It came up over the tops of her boots at once, cold enough to make her gasp, and the shock of it made her heart lurch. She pressed on. She waded. The water pushed against her legs, not fast but heavy, the way a big animal presses its weight against you. The stranger came behind her. "How much further?" he said. 3 houses down. The one with the blue shutters. They went. The water was up to her knees before they reached it. The blue-shuttered cottage sat lower than its neighbours, and the flood had already climbed halfway up its door. Water was pouring through the gap under the door, but it was also pouring in through the small window on the side, and Maren could hear faintly a voice calling from inside. "They are alive," she said. She pounded on the door. "Mr. Farley." "It is Maren." "Open the door." There was no answer. The door was swollen shut with water. She threw her shoulder against it. It did not move. The stranger set his hand on her arm, gently, and moved her aside. He took a step back. Then he drove his boot against the door just above the latch. The wood cracked. He hit it again. It broke inward. Water rushed out at them in a cold brown wave, and Merrin staggered, and the stranger caught her by the waist and steadied her. She did not have time to think about that either. She pushed forward into the cottage. Old Farley was on the bed. His wife was beside him, half in the water and half not, holding on to him and weeping quietly. The floor of the cottage was under a foot of water. The fire had gone out. Everything smelled of damp and old wool and fear. "He fell," his wife said. "He tried to get up and he fell and his leg is bad. I could not lift him. I could not lift him." "We have you," Maren said. "We have you now." The stranger was already moving. He crossed the room in 3 steps and lifted old Farley out of the bed as if the man weighed nothing at all. Maren saw him do it, and she saw the careful way he shifted the old man's weight so as not to jostle the bad leg, and she saw the way he did not once make the old man feel weak or afraid. It was a small thing. She noticed it. "Can you walk?" he said to the old woman. "I can." "I can, sir. Take my arm then, miss, the door." "Lead," Maren led. They came out of the cottage into water that was now above her knees, and it was rising. She could feel it rising even as they moved. The old woman clung to the stranger's free arm with both hands, and the old man was cradled against his chest. And Maren went ahead of them into the black wet night, and shouted over her shoulder to keep to the higher side of the lane, where the water was less deep. They reached the little bridge. The stream beneath it was almost level with the boards now. Maren crossed first, testing every step. Then the old woman. Then the stranger with old Farley in his arms. The bridge shook under them. It held. They went up the slope. It was the longest slope Maren had ever climbed. Old Farley moaned once. The stranger did not slow. When they came at last into the churchyard, the vicar himself flung open the door, and half the village pushed forward to help, and Mr. Farley was carried in and laid on a pew and covered with 3 cloaks at once. And his wife was surrounded by other women who wrapped their arms around her and pressed hot tea into her hands. Maren stood just inside the door, dripping, breathing hard, her whole body shaking now with the cold that had been kept back only by moving. The stranger stood beside her. He was breathing hard too. But not as hard as she was. His hair was plastered to his forehead. There was mud on his cheek. He looked down at her, and for the first time he really looked. Not past her, not around her, at her. "You are Maren Ashcombe," he said quietly. "That is what the old woman called you." "Yes, and you went through every door in this village tonight." Yes, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I heard you. On the road. Before you saw me. I heard you shouting from the top of the hill." She looked up at him. Her teeth were chattering. She could not stop them. "You heard me?" Every word. She did not know what to say to that, so she said nothing. And he said nothing. And they stood there, dripping in the doorway of the church, while the bell above them slowly stopped ringing, because the crisis had passed and the people were gathered and the water outside was still rising, but no one was left in it. Someone brought her a blanket. Someone else brought her a cup of something hot. She sat down on the nearest pew, and she drank it, and she did not remember. Later. What was in the cup? She only remembered that the stranger sat down at the other end of the same pew, and he took the cup someone brought him, and he drank it, and he did not speak, and neither did she, and it was somehow not uncomfortable. She fell asleep sitting up. She did not mean to. Her body simply gave out. When she woke, grey dawn was coming in through the high windows of the church, and someone had draped a second blanket over her shoulders, and the stranger was gone. She sat up slowly. Her father was on the pew across from her, also asleep, his colour better now. Around them the village was still there. Wet, tired, alive, she counted heads again without meaning to. She had them all. Old Farley was awake. His leg had been splintered by the blacksmith, who knew something of bones. His wife was holding his hand. He caught Maren's eye across the church, and he lifted his free hand to her in a small, exhausted salute. She looked around for the stranger. She did not find him. She went to the door of the church and pushed it open. The rain had stopped. The sky was pale grey at the edges. The village lay below her, and half of it was under water still, but the water was not moving anymore. It had settled. The worst was over. There was no horse at the crossroads. There was no man on the road. Wherever the stranger had gone, he had gone silently, before the light came. She stood there for a long time, looking down at the wet lane, before her father called for her, and she went back inside. For 3 days the water sat where it was. On the 4th day it began to go down, slowly, and by the end of the week it had drained back into the swollen but obedient river, and left behind mud, and ruined furniture, and the dead body of a chicken. The village set about cleaning itself. Roofs were mended. Windows were replaced. The blue-shuttered cottage was pumped out, and old Farley was moved into it again, with new blankets and a new fire in the grate. Nobody in the village stopped talking about the stranger. The story of him grew. He had appeared out of the storm, they said. He had carried old Farley through water up to his chest. He had broken the door with one kick. Some said he was 7 feet tall. Others said his eyes had been grey as knives. The vicar knew better than to gossip, but even the vicar admitted that he had never seen the man before in his life and did not know his name. Maren did not add to the story. When the women asked her, and they asked her often, because she was the only one who had spoken to him. She said only that he had been a passing traveler who had helped, and that she did not know his name either, and that he had been kind. She did not know how to explain the rest of it. She did not know how to explain the way he had looked at her in the doorway of the church. She did not want to explain it. She kept it for herself. Her father grew stronger with the improving weather. His cough eased. He sat outside their little cottage in the afternoons, on the small bench by the door, and he watched the village come back to itself, and he said one afternoon, quite suddenly, Maren, that night, "You saved us. I did not save anyone alone, Father. You were the first. Do not pretend you were not. The rest of us slept. You did not sleep. And you went into the rain." She was hanging washing on the line. She did not turn around. She said, "I could not sleep. That is all." "That is not all," her father said. "But you may say so if you wish." She smiled without turning around. He was quieter than he had been in years. Something in him had settled since that night. She thought perhaps he had needed to be shaken awake in more ways than one. 2 weeks after the flood, a rider came into the village. He was not the same rider. This one wore livery, dark green and silver, and he sat his horse with the trained straightness of a servant. He asked for the vicar. Mr. Fenwick came out of his little house wiping breadcrumbs from his front, and the two men spoke for a while at the vicarage gate. And then the vicar came into the lane looking for Maren. He found her in the small garden behind her cottage, pulling weeds. She had her sleeves rolled up, and her hands were dark to the wrists. "Maren, dear," he said, "you are wanted at the great house." She looked up. "What great house?" "Ravenhurst, the Duke's seat." She sat back on her heels. Her hands went still. "Ravenhurst? Why should I be wanted at Ravenhurst?" The vicar looked oddly at her, not unkindly, just as if he had thought she already knew something, and was surprised to find that she did not. "The Duke of Ravenhurst has asked to see you, my dear. His man is waiting. There must be some mistake. I have never met the Duke. I have never even seen the Duke. I do not think there is a mistake," the vicar said gently. The man was very clear. "Miss Maren Ashcombe of Little Marden." That is what he said. "There is only one of you." She stood up slowly. She looked down at her muddy hands. She looked at her plain grey dress with the mended sleeve. She looked back at the vicar. "I cannot go dressed like this." "No, you cannot. Go and change. He will wait." She went inside. She washed her hands in the basin. She changed into her best dress, which was still not a good dress, only a slightly less faded grey one with a small collar of white lace her mother had made for her long ago. She smoothed her hair. Her hands were shaking a little, and she did not know why. She went out to the lane. The rider in green and silver bowed to her from the saddle, and then dismounted to hand her up onto a second horse he had brought, a small chestnut mare with a proper lady's saddle. She had not been on a horse in years. She managed. She held the reins tightly. They set off up the lane. The road to Ravenhurst climbed through wet green hills. Maren had never been so far from Little Marden in her life. She saw fields she had never seen, and stone walls she had never touched, and a long avenue of tall trees whose names she did not know. At the end of the avenue the road opened, and she saw the house. It was not a house. It was a hall. It was the biggest single building she had ever seen, with her own eyes. Pale stone, and rows of windows, and a great door with 2 footmen standing at it as if they had been standing there for 100 years, and would stand there for 100 more. The rider handed her down. A steward met her at the door. She was shown through rooms so quiet her footsteps sounded loud, past paintings of horses and men in old-fashioned collars, past a great staircase of dark wood, and into a smaller room that felt more like a room where a person actually lived. There was a fire in it. There were books. There was a long table with papers on it, and a chair pushed back from the table as though its occupant had just stood. The Duke of Ravenhurst was standing by the window with his back to the door. She knew him at once by the height of him, by the shape of his shoulders under the fine black coat. Even before he turned she knew. He turned. His face was clean now, and his hair was dry and combed, and he wore a coat that fit him the way expensive coats fit men who never wore anything else. He was not smiling. He was watching her come in the way he had watched her in the church doorway, as though she were a thing he was still learning. "Miss Ashcombe," he said. "Your Grace," she said. And she curtsied, because she had been taught to curtsy to gentlemen, though her legs felt strange under her. He did not sit. He did not offer her a chair for a moment. He looked at her across the length of the room and he said, quietly, "You did not know it was me." "No, Your Grace. I did not know. I might have told you." "You did not." "No." He seemed to consider this. Then he said, "May I offer you a chair?" "Yes, Your Grace." She sat. He sat across from her, not at the great table, but in a smaller chair by the fire. He put his hands together on his knee. His hands were long and well kept, but there was still a small cut on one knuckle that she remembered had not been there before the night he broke the door. "I have thought about what to say to you," he said. "For 2 weeks I have thought about it. I have decided I would rather not have a speech, so I will simply say the thing. The thing, Your Grace. I was on that road that night on a matter I would rather not tell you about yet. I was traveling as a plain man because I did not want to be known. When I heard you shouting from the lane below, I stopped my horse. I could not go on. I sat and I listened, and then I saw you at the top of the slope with an old man on your arm, and I knew you were the voice I had heard, and I went into your church because I could not let you go back into that water alone." She did not speak. He went on. "I did not know you. I still do not know you. But I have known a great many people, Miss Ashcombe, and I have learned to tell the difference between people who care about being seen doing good and people who simply do good. You did not know I was there. You did not know anyone from outside the village was there, and you woke every house on that lane. I was afraid, Your Grace. Yes, but you did it afraid. That is the whole point." He paused. She saw his jaw work once, as if he were choosing his next words with care. "I have made inquiries about you," he said. "Forgive me. I asked the vicar, and the vicar told me you were the only child of Mr. Silas Ashcombe, and that your mother died when you were a girl, and that you have kept your father's house since. I asked what sort of person you were, and he said." Here his mouth did something that was almost a smile. He said, "You were the quiet one," and that quiet ones did not usually shout down floods, and he could not entirely account for it. I could not entirely account for it either, Your Grace. Well, he leaned back a little. Here we are then. There was a silence. It was not uncomfortable. She looked at her hands. "Why have you brought me here, Your Grace?" she said at last. "Because I owe you thanks, both as a man who was not asleep in one of those cottages, and as the master of these lands, which include Little Marden. Every soul in that village is mine to answer for. You answered for them when I did not. I owe you a great debt." She lifted her head. "You owe me nothing. I did what I would have done for any village. Yes, that is why I owe you." She did not know what to say to that. Something in her chest was tight and strange. "There is a second matter," he said. "The village. Mr. Fenwick tells me that old Farley's cottage was not the only one damaged. The lower 6 cottages have all been ruined. Roofs, floors, walls. Winter is coming. They cannot be lived in as they stand. No, Your Grace, they cannot. They will be rebuilt. All of them. At my expense. I have already sent word to my steward. Work will begin within the week." She felt tears rise in her eyes, and she was furious with herself for it. She blinked them back. "Thank you, Your Grace. It should have been done long before this. That wall along the river should have been raised 10 years ago. My father let it go, and I did not attend to it. That is on me." He said this without excuse and without drama, just as a plain fact. She looked at him again, and she thought, not for the first time and not for the last, that this was a man who did not lie for comfort. "There is a third matter," he said. "Your Grace, I would like your permission to call on you. At your father's house. As a plain man, not as a duke. I will not come in livery. I will not come with servants. I would like—" and here he stopped, and for the first time she saw him at a loss for a word. "I would like to know you, Miss Ashcombe. I do not know what will come of that. I do not promise anything, and I ask nothing of you." But if I do not know you, I think I will always regret it. So I ask." She sat very still. She thought about it. She thought about her small cottage with its low roof and its scarred table and its worn bench by the door. She thought about her father, thin and gentle, who would not know what to do with a duke in his house. She thought about the difference between this room, where the fire was banked and the books smelled of leather, and her own room, where the smell of peat was in everything. She thought about how easily this could become a story the whole village told for the wrong reasons. Then she thought about the way he had lifted old Farley off the bed as if the old man weighed nothing. The way he had said, "You did it, afraid. That is the whole point." The way he had heard her in the rain. "You may call, your grace," she said. "Not your grace. I do not know your other name. Alistair Ridley." "Missa Ridley, then, when you come." Something crossed his face, not a smile, but something close. "Missa Ridley," he said. "Yes, very well." She was sent home in the same carriage that had brought her, with a small parcel of bread and cheese and cold ham that she had not asked for, but that the housekeeper had pressed into her hands with a firm look. She rode back through the wet green hills with the parcel on her lap, and her hands folded on top of it, and her thoughts going in circles she could not follow. She told her father everything. She was not a girl who kept secrets from her father when she could help it. He listened with his hands folded in his lap, and his eyes half closed, and when she was done he said only, "Well, that is a thing." "Yes, you have said he may come." "Yes, good father," she began. "I am not blind, girl, and I am not a fool. If he is what you say, then let him come. If he is not, I will know it soon enough, and so will you." That was all he said about it that day. A week later, in the late afternoon, a man in a plain dark coat and plain boots came walking up the lane. He had no horse with him. He had no servant. He had a small package under one arm. Half the village saw him coming, and half the village did not recognize him without his livery of stillness and command, and by the time the whispers had begun he was already at Maren's door. She opened it. He took his hat off. He said, "Mr. Ridley, if you please." "Mr. Ridley," she said. "Come in." He came in. He ducked his head under the low lintel. Her father stood up from his bench by the fire and put out his thin hand, and the Duke, Mr. Ridley, for now, took it and shook it as if he shook the hands of thin old men every day. He sat down where he was told to sit. He was too big for the chair. He did not seem to notice. He accepted the cup of weak tea that Maren pressed into his hand, as if it were the best tea he had ever been given. They talked about the weather, about the river, about the rebuilding, which had begun on schedule and which had already put a new roof on old Farley's cottage. He asked her father about his cough. Her father, who did not talk much to strangers, found himself talking. Maren watched him. She had not seen her father talk like that to anyone in years. It occurred to her that the Duke was asking him questions in the way a man asks questions when he actually wants to hear the answers, and that this was a rarer thing than it should have been. Before he left, he put the small package on the table. "For you," he said, and he did not look at her when he said it, which she thought was tactful of him. She unwrapped it after he had gone. It was a book. A small, plain book of poems by a man she had never heard of. Inside the front cover, in a strong slanted hand, was written only, "For M." A, for the voice that carried through the rain. She held the book for a long time. Then she put it under her pillow. He came again. And again. Twice a week for 4 weeks. Always in the plain coat. Always on foot. Always with the same small courtesies and the same quiet attention. The village had by now put together the story, or most of it. There were whispers. Maren ignored them. Her father ignored them, too. Mr. Ridley, if he heard them, gave no sign. They walked together sometimes, in the lanes above the village, where the grass was greening again after the flood, and the hedgerows were coming into small pink and white flower, and the air smelled of wet earth and hawthorn, and the far-off salt of the sea that neither of them could see from where they stood. He was not, she found, a talkative man. He was a listening man. When he spoke well. When he did not speak, he was still there. That had begun to be a thing she noticed. Some men, when they went quiet, went away. He did not. His quiet was a room she could sit in. She told him about her mother. She had not told anyone about her mother in years. He listened. He did not offer platitudes. He asked one question at the end that showed he had actually heard what she said. That was all. He told her, very slowly over several walks, about his father. About the estate he had inherited too young. About the mistakes he had made in the first years, when he had thought a duke was mostly a signature on papers. About the tenant families he had learned too late that he was responsible for. About the wall along the river at Little Marden that he had not raised. She did not tell him it was all right. It was not all right. She said instead, "You will raise it now." Yes, that is the important thing. He looked at her. He did not answer for a moment. Then he said, "You are the least sentimental woman I have ever met." Is that bad, Miss Ridley? No, it is the opposite of bad. There was one afternoon she did not forget. They were sitting on a low stone wall at the edge of the upper pasture. The sun had come out for the first time in a week, and the light on the wet grass was the color of a new coin. He had brought bread and cheese in his coat pocket, which he produced with something like embarrassment, as if he was not sure whether a duke was allowed to picnic on a stone wall. She had laughed at him, and he had almost laughed back, which for him was a considerable expression. They were eating. He was looking down at his hands. "May I ask you a question, Miss Ashcombe?" "You may." "That night, when you were shouting in the lane, were you thinking of anyone in particular?" She considered. "No, I was thinking of all of them. Mrs. Grail and her babies, old Farley, the blacksmith's wife, my father. I was thinking of everyone in every house. You were thinking of your father." "Yes, anyone else?" She looked at him sideways. "Should I have been thinking of anyone else?" "No," he said. "I only wondered. I have thought about that voice for 4 weeks. I have wondered whose face was in your mind when you called." "Everyone's, Miss Ridley. That is the answer I hoped for." She did not ask him what he meant. She thought she knew. The gossip in the village grew. It did not stay only in the village. Because Little Marden was on the edge of Ravenhurst land, and because the villages talked to each other, and because whispers travel faster than any horse, the story of the Duke of Ravenhurst walking to a cottage in a plain coat began to move outward. It reached the market towns. It reached the county families. It reached, eventually, a certain lady in a large house some 15 miles away, who had been raised from her cradle to believe she would one day be the Duchess of Ravenhurst. Her name was Lady Petronella Vaughncrest. She was the eldest daughter of the Earl of Merthyr. She was handsome in the polished way that clean stone is handsome. And she was intelligent in the sharp way that a knife is intelligent, and she had been introduced to Alistair Ridley when they were both 15, and had been informed, in the same conversation, that they were to consider themselves suited to each other. There had been no formal engagement. There had been an understanding. Understandings in her circle were nearly as binding as the marriage itself. Lady Petronella did not care for surprises, and she did not care for stories of dukes and cottages, and she certainly did not care for the name Maron Ashcombe. She put on her best morning dress, and she took her best carriage, and she went to Ravenhurst without an invitation. She did not find the Duke. The Duke was, as it happened, at that moment sitting in a small cottage in Little Marden, being taught by an old man how to properly clean a rabbit. Lady Petronella found the housekeeper. She was told, in polite phrases she was very good at translating, that the Duke was not at home. She was also told, more delicately, that when the Duke was at home he was often not receiving. She left in a cold, silent temper, and she asked her coachman on the way home for the direction to Little Marden. She came the following Tuesday. She came in her carriage with 2 footmen and a maid, and she rolled up to the lane in Little Marden as if she were rolling up to a play. She descended into the mud in fine kid slippers. She looked around at the low cottages with an expression she had been taught to wear when confronted with anything unfortunate. She was directed, after some inquiry, to Silas Ashcombe's door. Maron was inside. She had been mending a pair of her father's stockings. She heard the carriage before she saw it, and she went to the door with the stocking still in her hand. Lady Petronella did not come in. She stood in the lane, and she looked at Marin from the top of her fair head to the hem of her mended dress, and she said, in a voice pitched to carry all the way to the vicarage, "So you are the girl." Marin said nothing. She had learned, that night in the rain, that some things did not need answering. "I have come to see you," Lady Petronella said, "because I felt I owed it to you to be honest, which is more than has been done for you by others, I am sure. The Duke of Ravenhurst is not free, my dear. He has been promised to me since we were children. His people expect it. My people expect it. He knows it as well as I do." Marin said nothing. "I do not blame you," Lady Petronella went on, and here her voice went a little softer, a little kinder in shape, though not in fact. "I am sure it is very flattering to have the attention of such a man. Any girl in your position would be turned about by it, and it is charming, truly, that you called out in the rain that night. Very brave, very like a heroine in a novel. But you must understand, my dear, that a novel is one thing and a life is another, and a duke does not marry a girl who has spent her life mending stockings by a peat fire. Whatever he has said to you, whatever he has led you to believe, and I do not doubt he has been kind, because he is a kind man, in his way he cannot make you what you are not. And what you are not is a duchess." The lane was very quiet. Marin could hear the wind in the hedge behind the cottage. Lady Petronella tilted her head, as though examining something interesting. "You are a country girl," she said, "who screamed loudly enough one night to catch a great man's notice. That is all you are, and when he tires of the novelty, he will come home to me, and this," she gestured, gently, at Marin, at the cottage. At the mended dress, at the whole small life gathered there in the doorway. "This will be a pretty story he tells over brandy. Do not let it be more to you than it should be. It will hurt you less that way." She waited. She wanted Marin to cry, or to argue, or to slam the door. Marin did none of those things. She stood in the doorway. She held the stockings loosely in her hand. She looked at Lady Petronella for one long moment, the way she had looked at the river the night it climbed the wall. Then she said, very quietly, "Thank you for coming, my lady. I know the way to my own door. I hope you know the way to yours." And she stepped back inside the cottage, and she closed the door. She did not slam it. She did not raise her voice. The door simply shut, gently and finally, between them. Inside, she stood with her back against the door, and she did not cry. She did not tremble. She looked down at the stockings in her hand, and she saw that she had gripped them so tightly that the wool had left a print on her palm. Her father was watching her from his bench. "Marin," he said. "I heard her, father. So did I. I know. That was not kindly meant, girl, no. What will you do?" She looked up at him. Her eyes were dry. "Nothing," she said. "There is nothing to be done." She said what she came to say. I heard it. I will not say it back to her, and I will not say it to him. You will not tell him she came? No. Why not? Because if he is what I think he is, he will not need me to tell him. And if he is not what I think he is, then it does not matter. Her father looked at her for a long time. Then he said, "You are your mother's child, Marin Ashcombe. God help me, you are your mother's child." She smiled at him. She went back to her mending. She kept her word. When Mr. Ridley came that Thursday, as he had come every Thursday for 6 weeks now, she did not tell him. She poured his tea. She listened to him tell her about a foal that had been born at the home farm, and had almost died, and had lived. She walked with him along the lane, and up to the low pasture. She did not tell him, but something in her had gone still. He noticed it. He was a man who noticed things. He said nothing for a long time. Then, when they were sitting on the same low stone wall as before, he said, "Something has happened." "Nothing has happened, Mr. Ridley, something has. Nothing that need concern you." He was quiet. She thought that would be the end of it. But he turned his head and looked at her, and his eyes were steady, and he said, "Miss Ashcombe, if someone has spoken unkindly to you because of me, it concerns me." She looked at her hands. She did not answer. "Was it Lady Petronella?" he said. She looked up sharply. Ah, he said, quietly. So it was. How did you know? Because she called at Ravenhurst a fortnight past. I was not there. I heard of it after. And because she is the only person in the county with both the boldness and the reason to come and see you in person. I have been waiting for her to try it. Mr. Ridley, Alistair, he said. For God's sake out here, Alistair, Alistair then, I will not repeat what she said. You do not need to. I know almost to the word what she said. I have known Petronella Vaughan-Crest since I was 15. She turned to face him. Then, it is true. About the understanding. He did not look away. There is an understanding, he said. There has been since we were children. Neither of us made it. Our parents made it. It has never been formalized. There is no engagement. There is no contract. There is only a long assumption held together by other people's expectations. That is not nothing. No, he said. It is not nothing. But it is not a promise I have made. And I will not make it. She stared at him. You must understand what that will cost you, she said. I do understand. Your family, her family, the county, all the people who have expected this all your life. I understand, Miss Ashcombe. Alistair, she said. She had not meant to say it, and it came out anyway. Alistair, this is not something to be done lightly. I am not doing it lightly. I have not done anything lightly since I was 20 years old. I have done a great many things badly, but I have not done any of them lightly. She could not speak. He went on, in the same quiet voice. I have thought about this for weeks, Marin. I did not begin thinking about it because of what Lady Petronella did at your door. I began thinking about it the night I heard your voice in the rain. I have not been able to stop. I have tried. I have told myself all the reasons I should stop. None of them held. You do not perform for anyone. You do not calculate. You did not know who I was when you let me stand in that church doorway with you, and you have not treated me differently since you knew. That is a rare thing. It is a rarer thing than I can properly explain to you. I did not know how rare it was until I met you. His voice roughened on the last words. He cleared his throat once. He did not look away. I am not asking you for anything now, he said. I am telling you what is in me. You may do with it what you like. If you would rather I did not come again, I will not come. If you would rather I came only as a neighbor, I will come only as a neighbor. But I could not sit here on this wall with you and let you think that a woman like Petronella Vaughan-Crest has the last word on my life. She does not. The wind moved in the grass. Somewhere far off a lamb called for its mother. Marin looked down at her hands. Then she looked up at him. Her eyes were wet now, though she was not weeping. I do not know how to be a duchess, she said. I do not care if you never learn. The village will talk about me for the rest of my life. The village will talk about us both. Let them. My father, your father, Miss Ashcombe, is a fine and shrewd man who has already, I believe, taken my measure. I am willing to be measured again as often as he likes. She almost laughed. It came out as a small, unsteady sound. She was quiet for a while. He waited. He was good at waiting. She had noticed that too. I will need to think, she said at last. Yes, I will not answer you today. I did not ask you to. But, Alistair, yes? She lifted her chin. Her voice steadied. Whatever I say when I do answer you, thank you. For being honest. It is the thing I care most about in the world. I know, he said. That is why I was. They walked back down toward the village together, not touching, not speaking. At her door he stopped. He took her hand, the first time he had touched her since he had steadied her at the door of the flooded cottage, and he lifted it and held it for one long moment against his own, palm to palm, warm through her thin skin. He did not raise it to his lips. He did not need to. Then he let go, and he said good day. And he walked back up the lane the way he had come. She stood in the doorway and watched him go. There is a habit some people learn young, of not letting themselves want things. Marin had learned it early. She had learned it when her mother died and there was no more soft hand to smooth her hair. She had learned it in the years of her father's slow fading. She had learned it every night for years, sleeping under the same scratchy blanket, in the same small cottage, listening to the same river. Wanting had never been useful to her, but she wanted him. She sat with that for 4 days. She did not tell her father. She mended stockings and hung washing and carried water from the well. She helped Mrs. Grail with the children on market day. She sat beside her father in the evenings and read to him from the little book of poems that had been left on her table so long ago. She said nothing about the walk on the pasture wall. On the 5th day she walked up the road to Ravenhurst by herself. She did not send word. She did not take a carriage. She walked. It was a long walk, and her boots were the same boots she had run through the flood in, and by the time she came up the long avenue of trees she was tired, and her hair had escaped from its pins, and there was dust on the hem of her dress. She was met at the door by the same steward. He did not look surprised. "Miss Ashcombe, His Grace is in the small library. Would you show me, please?" He showed her. The small library was a room she had not seen before. It was lined with dark books. There was a fire burning low. There was a large writing desk near the window. The Duke of Ravenhurst was at the desk. He was in his shirt sleeves. He had ink on the side of his hand. He looked up when the door opened, and he stood at once, and something crossed his face. Surprise. And then something softer than surprise, and he did not speak for a moment. "Maren," he said. Alistair the steward closed the door behind her. They were alone. She stood in the middle of the carpet. She was very aware of the dust on her hem. She lifted her chin anyway. She had lifted her chin at Lady Petronella, and she could lift it now. "I have come to answer you," she said. He did not move. "Yes, you told me I did not need to answer today. That was 4 days ago. I have thought about it every hour since. I have thought about my father, about the village, about what it will look like, about what it will cost you and what it will cost me. I have thought about the woman who came to my door. I have thought about the fact that I do not know how to run a great house and would break every dish in the kitchen the first week. Maren, let me finish, please." He inclined his head. He waited. "I have thought," she said, "about the fact that I could say no to you, that I could go on with my life in the village exactly as it was, that I could mend stockings and carry water and grow old there, and never once have to face a room full of people looking at me and wondering how such a person came to be there. I have thought about all of that. It would be easier. It would be safer. And it would be a lie." Her voice caught. She swallowed and went on. "You heard me in the rain. Nobody has ever heard me in my whole life the way you heard me in the rain. And I have gone on hearing you back, in every quiet you have brought into my house, and every question you have asked my father, and every walk. I did not know a person could be heard like that. I did not know I wanted to be." She stopped. Her hands were trembling. She pressed them together. "So my answer is yes. Whatever it is you are asking, whatever it costs." Yes. For a long moment he did not move. He was standing with one hand still resting on the edge of the desk, and his shirt was open at the throat, and his hair had fallen forward over his brow, and he was looking at her the way he had looked at her the very first time, in the doorway of the church, when he had said, "I heard every word." Then he crossed the room. He did it slowly, not because he did not want to hurry, because he wanted, she thought later, to remember every step. He stopped in front of her. He was close enough now that she could smell the ink on his hand and the faint clean smell of soap on his shirt and, underneath, something that was only him and that she had already learned by heart. He lifted his hand. He did not touch her face. He held it near enough that she could feel the warmth of his palm against her cheek without contact. "Say it again," he said. "Yes," once more. "Yes, Alistair." He closed his eyes. He let out a slow breath, as if he had been holding it for weeks and had only just remembered that he could let it go. Then, very carefully, he put his hand against her cheek. His palm was warm. His thumb moved once, lightly, across her cheekbone. He did not kiss her. He did not need to yet. He rested his forehead against hers, and she felt him breathe, and she breathed with him, and for a long moment neither of them moved. "You walked all this way," he said at last quietly. "I did. With no word to me. I did. Maren, you are going to be the death of me." "I do not think so," she said. "I think I am going to be the opposite." He did laugh then. A small, low, surprised laugh, the kind of laugh that comes out of a man who has forgotten he owns one. He drew back just enough to look at her, and he was smiling. Not much, but truly. "Sit down," he said. "Please, you have walked 6 miles. Sit down. I will have tea sent. And then we will begin, in whatever order you like, to work out what is to be done." She sat. He sent for tea. He sent for her father too, though she did not know it at first. A rider went out that same afternoon, and Silas Ashcombe was fetched in the Duke's own carriage, and brought up the avenue with his best coat on and his stick in his hand, and he was received in the small library like a lord, and asked with proper respect for his daughter's hand. He gave it. He would tell Maren afterward that he had never known such a thing was possible in this world, that a man of that station would ask a man like him such a question in such a way. He would say it was the finest hour of his life. He would say it more than once over the years to anyone who would listen. And Maren would tease him for saying it, and he would tell her to hush, and it would not silence him at all. There was, of course, everything else. There was Lady Petronella, who had to be spoken to. The Duke did it himself. He rode to her father's house in his best coat, and he was received in a room that was even colder than the day outside, and he said what he had come to say. He said it with respect. He said it without apology. Lady Petronella did not cry. She was not the crying sort. She said something quiet and sharp that he did not repeat, and she rose and she left the room, and that was the end of it. Her father raged. Her mother sulked. The county whispered. None of it changed the fact. There was the village to face, and Maren faced it. She walked down the lane the morning after her answer with her head high and her hand in her father's arm, and she went to the vicarage, and she told Mr. Fenwick first, because he had known her since she was 10, and he wept openly and made no attempt to hide it. She told Mrs. Grayle. She told old Farley, who kissed her hand and called her Your Grace, though she was not one yet, and would not let her make him stop. She told the blacksmith. She told the cobbler. By nightfall there was not a soul in Little Marden who did not know, and there was not a soul in Little Marden who did not think it right. There was the small kindness she learned about afterward, and which changed her again. It was Mrs. Grayle who told her. Mrs. Grayle, whose 3 children had all had bad boots that winter, and whose husband could not afford new ones. "Mrs." Grayle said, one afternoon over the washing, "You know it was him, do you not?" "Who was who?" "The boots. The children's boots. New ones. A pair each. Left on the doorstep in the night, with no note, no name. But I saw the wrappings, Maren. That paper was from a shop I have never seen the like of. In town, they say. A very fine shop. It was him. Alistair? Who else? He remembers things. My little Tom told him one day when he was walking through the lane that his toes had come out the end. Just told him, the way children do. And a fortnight later, Boots, he said nothing to me. He has never said one word about it. And he will not, Maren, if you ask him. He will pretend he does not know what you mean. She did ask him. That evening, sitting with him by the fire in the small library at Ravenhurst, he did exactly what Mrs. Grayle had said he would. He looked at his book. He said, "I do not know what you mean, Alistair. Truly, I do not know what you mean." She let him have that. She did not press. She sat and watched him read, and she thought, this is the man. This one. Not the one who could kick down a door, not the one who could stand in front of an earl and refuse a promise. This one. The one who put boots on a child's feet in the dark and would not say so. They were married in the little church at Little Marden, not at the great cathedral in town, not at Ravenhurst Chapel. In the same small church where Maren had sat wet and shaking on a pew the night of the flood, where the same vicar stood at the altar now, and where every soul in the village was crowded into the pews, and where old Farley sat in the front with his splinted leg propped on a cushion and refused to sit anywhere else. She wore a plain gown of ivory. She carried no flowers, only a single sprig of hawthorn her father had cut for her that morning, from the hedge behind their cottage. When she walked up the aisle on Silas Ashcombe's arm, her father was crying so hard that he could not see his feet, and she had to steer him gently, and the whole church laughed, softly, in the way people laugh at things that are almost too full to bear. Alistair was waiting at the altar. He did not look at anyone else. He did not glance at the pews. He watched her come, every step of the way, with the same steady attention he had turned on her the first time, in the church doorway. When she reached him, he took her hand and lifted it, and held it against his own, palm to palm, warm through her thin skin. Then he set it down, and he turned with her to the vicar, and they were married. Outside, the sun was out. The bell of the little church rang, and it did not sound frightened this time. It sounded glad. The village followed them out into the lane. Someone had strewn petals of wild rose down the path from the church door, and the smell of them rose up warm and sweet in the sunshine. Maren looked down the lane, the same lane she had run down in the mud and the dark, and she thought about how strange a thing a life could be, how the very ground under her feet could be the same ground, and yet, on this morning, be a different ground entirely. They lived, in the end, mostly at a smaller house on Ravenhurst lands, not at the Great Hall. It was Alistair's choice, and Maren agreed. The Great Hall was for state occasions. The smaller house was for a life. It had a garden and a library and a kitchen where Maren was allowed to knead bread when she wanted to, though the housekeeper looked pained about it. Silas Ashcombe was given a set of rooms on the ground floor with a view of a rose bush, and he lived out his days there, coughing less, laughing more. Spoiling his grandchildren rotten. There were grandchildren, 2 of them. A boy first, quiet and dark-haired like his father, and then a girl who arrived shouting so loudly that the midwife laughed and said, "Well, my lady, we know whose voice she has." The wall along the river at Little Marden was raised, and raised properly, in stone and mortar that would hold. The lower cottages were rebuilt with better roofs and higher floors. There was never another flood like that flood, in Maren's lifetime. Old Farley lived another 12 years, and told the story of the night he was carried out of his cottage by a duke 1,000 times, and he improved it every time, and no one ever asked him to stop. Maren never quite got used to being called Your Grace. Alistair never quite got used to being called anything else in company. In private he was Alistair, and she was Maren, and in the quiet of an evening by their own fire, with a book open on his knee and her mending in her lap and their children asleep upstairs, they would sometimes look up at the same moment and catch each other's eye, and neither would speak, and neither would need to. She thought, sometimes, on nights when the rain came down hard against the windows, and the wind rose in the chimney, of a small girl she had once been, running through mud in the black hours of the night, shouting a warning at every dark door. She thought of how thin her voice had sounded to her then, how small, how likely to be swallowed by the storm. She thought of how she had not known, and could not have known, that one man on a hill above the village had heard her, and had turned his horse, and had come. And she would look across the fire at him, and he would look up, as though he had heard her think it, and he would smile, the small, private smile that was only for her, and she would smile back, and neither of them would say a word. Some voices, once heard, are heard forever, and some doors, once opened in the rain, never truly close again.